Welcome to the Application Technical Assistance webinar for the City of Elk Grove. My name is Alicia, and I'm a Management Analyst in the Housing and Public Services Department. In my role, I oversee several of our nonprofit grant programs. Today's webinar is being recorded, and the recording will be posted on the city's website within a day or two after this recording. So please note that if you want to refer back to this. All participants are currently joining with audio on mute and cameras disabled. At the end of the presentation, you'll have the opportunity to raise your hand and unmute for our live question and answer period. However, if you have questions during the presentation, please enter in the Q&A section, and you'll notice that should be at the top of your screen or at the bottom, depending on how yours is set up. Questions that are not answered as we're going through this slide will receive a response during the Q&A portion. So we'll try and answer them as we can go through, but we're not going to stop the slide presentation to answer questions. We'll just continue on, and then if things don't get answered, we will catch them at the end. Please note that our chat box is not being monitored. So if you have any questions or anything, make sure you're putting them in that Q&A section. If you have questions after the webinar and after our live Q&A session has ended, I encourage you to reach out to our city staff directly, and our contact information will be listed at the end of the slides. So at this time, I would like to let our other presenters introduce themselves. Jody, you want to go first?
Sure. Hi, everyone. I'm Jody Moreno. I'm the Community Event Program Manager for the City of Elk Grove. So in addition to producing all of the city events that hopefully all of you come to and attend, I also oversee the event sponsorship grant program, which is one of the things we'll be talking today, along with Alicia and her grant opportunities. And I'm going to let our newest employee, Josh, introduce himself.
I'm Josh Armstrong, Community Event Specialist. I am really Jody's right-hand man, making sure that all your grants are processed and everything is up to the requirements of the grant process. So very nice meeting everyone, and look forward to working with you.
Great. So today's agenda for our training is we're really going to talk about the availability of grant funding overview. So talk about what options are available for them through the city. Talk a little bit about individual grant program summaries. So more about each individual program, the application process, web grants, for those of you who do not know the system that we use, as well as talk a little bit about application breakdown by grant type, cover some key grant policies, and then again, that live question and answer period. So to start with, we have a couple of short polls to get an idea of who's on the webinar and which of the grant programs you're interested in. So bear with me as I get this started. Our first one is we really want to see what population you serve with your organization. So we're asking you to identify the population served by your organization's programs and select all that apply. Couple more seconds for all those people to get their final answers in. Okay. So just to give everybody an idea of who's on board, the majority of those organizations are general public, and then I guess our next is low-income households and those. So thank you. Our next poll, this one. Okay, our next poll is just prior funding. So has your organization applied for City of Elk Grove nonprofit grant funding previously? About another 15 seconds if anyone else wants to respond. Okay, we're about half and half. A little bit more no's than yeses, but that's good. Let's give you an opportunity to learn more about our programs. Okay. So next, as I mentioned, the city has 3 funding opportunities. One is the Community Service Grant, which has 2 different tiers, which we can talk about later, the Community Development Block Grant, and our Event Sponsorship Grant. All 3 grants that we're talking about today are for activities or events that will occur between July 1st, 2026 and June 30th, 2027. So we start the process early for our application review to be able to go to City Council. And then our CDBG program also has federal requirements and timelines that we have to build in there. So we start now for funding that will start next July. A little bit of basics about the community service grant. So the maximum, the CSG grant is a locally funded grant program approved annually by the City Council. It supports activities that benefit Elk Grove residents. It's a very flexible funding source. It has the ability to do ongoing program costs, so like staffing, supplies, etc., equipment purchases, and or capital improvements to facilities. The maximum award under the community service grant is $100,000 annually to any one agency. Fundraising and one-time events are not eligible under this category, but we'll talk about that when we get to Jody's category. And really the focus on CSG is that we're looking for activities. This funding should expand the organization's capacity or reach, enabling new or expanded services, programs, or resources into the city of Elk Grove. So rather than replacing existing funding sources that you already have in place, we're looking at expanding and making larger. Our next is the Community Development Block Grant, and this is funded by the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development. It's an annual program. Since 2003, the city has received an annual entitlement grant from the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development, or HUD. They award grants to entitlement community agencies to carry out a wide range of community development activities directed towards revitalizing neighborhoods, economic development, and providing improved community facilities and services. Awarded entities become subrecipients of federal grants and are required to comply with all applicable federal regulations. So there's links and information throughout the application for applicants to do research and learn more about those requirements and make sure that they are able to abide by them. There's not a maximum award amount under the CDBG program. However, as you will see in a bit when we talk about the budget, there's limitations based on the total amount of funding that we have available. Again, we're looking for programs to apply for funding under this category if they are serving, they're primarily serving low-income areas or low-income persons or households. I've listed some of the amounts for a 1-person household and a 4-person household. If you need other numbers, I have them from 1 through 8. if your average household size is a different number than that, you can let us know. And again, with funds for this program, this really, again, should expand the capacity. Federal funds cannot be used to supplant or replace funding that is existing. So we need to make sure that we're looking at that and being able to grow and offer new programming.
For the ESG or Event Sponsorship Grant Program, these are awarded annually by our City Council, and they're designed to provide assistance for Elk Grove-based nonprofit organizations if you're going to host a large-scale special event that benefits the Elk Grove community. Some of the requirements, and we'll go through a lot of them, and you'll see them in the application, is that the event must take place in Elk Grove within the city limits. So sometimes there's some areas outside of our city limits that feel like Elk Grove, but it needs to be defined by our city limits. The event can't be organized around political or religious purposes. And if it is for religious purposes, it needs to be an event that is designed to educate the community and relate to diversity, equity, and inclusion, and being a city welcome to all. And I can think of an example of that was we do a Diwali event. And that is something that can fall underneath a religious purpose per se. So things like that, but you can ask more questions if you have a question regarding that element. If you have a fundraising component, you're eligible as long as all of the net proceeds will be provided to a nonprofit that serves primarily Elk Grove residents. So we need to see that the money you're raising is going back into our community. And we do offer a lot of flexible funding, and that is in direct funding, which is cash. And then city facility use. We do have 2 facilities that I'll go through here a little bit later. And then in-kind services. And those refer to things like police, traffic management, and integrated waste, and some marketing services.
So organizations that are eligible to apply for our city programs must be legally formed under IRS and recognized as a nonprofit organization, as well as those that are registered and in good standing with the California Secretary of State, and if required by law, the California Attorney General's Registry of Charitable Trusts. There's links that are further in this application or in this webinar, as well as in the application, for you to be able to check your status on each of those, but making sure that you are up to date on all of those. For the CDBG and CSG programs, organizations must have completed at least 1 full fiscal year as a nonprofit to be eligible to apply. Government agencies independent of the City of Elk Grove are also eligible to apply, such as the school district, CSD. And then for CDBG, we also have a funding category that our city departments can apply for, so like our Public Works program. For-profit entities and individuals are not eligible for these funds. The estimated budget that we will have available for the July 2026 to June 2027 program year is up on the screen. Our CSG, we have our traditional category as well as our capital improvements for a total of approximately $587.71. That funding, again, is approved and budgeted with our annual city budget and is approved by City Council. So right now, all of these are tentative. Our CDBG budget amount that we have listed is based on what we currently have funding in this current fiscal year. The feds don't typically release the budget until the federal budget has been approved, and sometimes that's as late as May or later, who knows? So we're just kind of estimating based on what our current allocations are on that.
Same goes for the ESG budget. These are estimations. It all depends on the type of event. The in-kind, as you can see, has the highest cost to our department. And those, again, are things like police, traffic management. When we close a road for a parade, the costs are very high, and that does get charged to the budget. So those are the numbers you're seeing there, and those will all be totaled and more accurate once all the applications are received and we have a chance to review with our police and our Public Works department.
Great. And so our application deadlines, we have 2 different deadlines, one for CSG CDBG, and that is February 9th. And then our ESG application deadline is February 20th. Both deadlines end at 11:59 p.m. on the dot. in their on their respective dates. It's a system deadline that the web grant system has set up. So anything after that, if you're online at 11:59 still working, you cannot submit unless you've submitted by that date. We purposefully have these spread out about a week in between because historically we've had people who have applied for events under the CSG grant, and we want to make sure that we have time, that when we see them and catch them, that you have time to actually apply in the correct application. So they're also spread out just to give our agencies who are applying for both a little bit of flexibility and deadlines, and knowing that they can get them both turned in. So this is our third poll for today. Based on that very brief info of the different programs, we want to get an idea of which types of funding those who are on the webinar think that they might be applying for. So don't worry if you're still undecided. Hopefully by the end of this webinar you won't be, but if you want to go ahead and click what your initial thoughts are, we'll leave this up for about a minute. Couple more seconds. Any last answers? Okay. Again, we're pretty split. I think community service grant and event sponsorship grant, both of those are probably most popular. So that's great to know. And for those that are unsure, hopefully you'll have an answer in your head by the time we're done here. Okay, so now we're going to dive in a little bit more into each individual program and just talk a little bit more about them and give you some more details. Now, this is the Community Service Grant and Community Development Block Grant. Eligible activities under these two funding categories are programs, projects, or activities that provide direct benefits to Elk Grove residents. So services for low-income households, youth, seniors, persons with disabilities, persons experiencing homelessness, those with mental illness, veterans, foster youth, victims of domestic violence. Those are just some of the beneficiary categories that might be served under these programs. A food or a commodity assistance program, if you are providing meals or emergency food assistance to residents. This doesn't count activity meals, like just having food at sessions or programs. This is more of just an assistance program that you're providing. Job training or education programs, recreation, sports, community arts programs, public safety and crime prevention, housing assistance programs, improvements to existing facilities that serve the public, or acquisition or purchase of new facilities. A lot of people come to me and they're like, which one do I apply for? So organizations can apply for up to 2 funding categories per application. Both CDBG and CSG may be selected in the same application. However, only one type of CSG funding, traditional or capital improvements, can be selected per application. But most organizations should apply for the community service grant. I would venture to say 100%, but not everybody does. But just know that if you're applying for more than one program, it's not going to affect your chances of getting funding. We will help you determine which funding source is better for your project or your activity that you're doing. So pretty much everyone, I would say, should check community service grant. And then additionally, select the community development grant if your organization has a system for award management or SAM.gov unique entity ID and you're registered and in good standing. If you have your organization collects data on the number of low-income persons served, if you can comply with applicable federal regulations, and there's a link that we'll put in here as well as in the application for you to research that. And if your organization is willing and able to collect income and demographic data from every person served. The federal programs have a lot more requirements on them, so you have to make sure that you're able to comply with those. Again, those getting CDBG funding will have the role of administering federal grant funds on behalf of the city and are required to comply with all applicable federal regulations. So a separate application is required for each activity or project an organization is applying for, but while organizations may submit multiple applications, only one application is permitted per project or activity. So if you're doing activity A, you're only going to submit one application for it versus two. But if you have two separate, totally separate types of applications or activities, you can submit two separate applications. Again, if you're unsure which funding category to apply for after this webinar, you can contact me and we can talk through it and help you identify that. So eligible organizations may apply for funding under one category of funding available for the CSG program per application. So what that means is if you are applying for capital improvements, you can apply either, you want to improve your building, you can apply either under the traditional grant or the capital improvement grant. So giving a little bit of background, our traditional CSG grant is a reoccurring grant for operational or program expenses as well as capital improvements. It kind of covers everything. The maximum award available to any entity under this category in a single year is $100,000. And recipients of this grant category can apply on an annual basis. So you can continue to apply every year. Our capital improvement is a little bit different because it's a one-time purchase of equipment or supplies that will support the mission of your operation. The grant awards range from a minimum of $5,000 to a maximum of $100,000. But if you are awarded funding under this category, you have to wait an additional 3 years to apply under this category. So again, you can apply under either if you are doing a capital improvement project. Just note if you're awarded funding under capital improvement, you cannot request funding under that category for another 3 years. The majority will probably fall under traditional, but if you're, again, unsure which one to apply for, give me a call and we can talk about and walk through that. So looking at eligible costs for our CSG and our CDBG budget requests, these are incomplete lists, so please, if you have something that you're not sure where it falls, let me know and we can talk through it afterwards. But eligible costs for the community service and the community development block grant are personnel, so staff salary or benefits, your office facility lease or utility costs, materials and supplies for your programs, communications if you have phone costs or internet costs associated with those programs serving Elk Grove residents, local travel and mileage, any contractual services, so financial, IT, janitorial support, things like that, capital improvements, and or indirect costs up to the 15% de minimis of modified total direct costs. Ineligible costs, again, incomplete list, but are costs that are not directly related to providing services to Elk Grove residents. So if your program serves Elk Grove and non-Elk Grove residents, you're only able to request funding for that portion that serves Elk Grove residents. Ineligible is programs or services that promote religion or political activities, marketing, incentives, or fundraising, as well as staff time that is dedicated to those activities. Any entertainment, furnishings, or personal property. Meals or food-related expenses, again, are ineligible unless they are part of a direct food assistance program. And then any payment of debt or expense incurred prior to July 1st, 2026. Again, these grants start July 1, 2026. So there's a lot of flexibility in the cost that the city can cover under the CSG and CDBG programs, but we do require documentation for all of it. So all costs need to be clearly related to your approved scope of work. Acceptable documentation will include things like your payroll summaries, your timesheets, invoices, paid receipts, mileage logs that are signed. So think about these things as you're asking for your request, then making sure that your organization has those documents tracking and readily available to be submitted as part of a grant reimbursement request. If your activity again serves non-Elk Grove residents, organizations need to have an acceptable accounting methods to allocate and separate the costs for Elk Grove and non-Elk Grove. And again, we will only be able to fund the proportionate share to those that are residents served. For CDBG, again, this is a federal program, so organizations have to comply with the uniform administrative requirements, cost principles, and audit requirements of the federal awards. And there's this 2 CFR 200. There's links in this as well as in your application to help guide you to research that. So in general, the CSG and CDBG programs are designed to provide supplemental funding and are not intended to fully finance proposed activities. So for the most part, those that get awarded funding are not submitting 100% request of their program costs to this application process. They are requesting a portion of those costs. If the organization does not plan to expand services or assist more people with a proposed activity, so say you're doing an activity that is already in existence and you're not looking to expand it or serve more, then the funding request really should clearly justify why the current funding or past funding is insufficient to be able to continue that activity that has been in existence. If the proposed activity will serve both Elk Grove and non-Elk Grove resident, the application has to really calculate the percentage of proposed time spent on Elk Grove participants and request no more than that percentage for any one budget line item that is in the budget. So I'll let Jody take over for this one.
Thanks, Alicia. Okay, so when we talk about the event sponsorship grant program, there are different types of events that we're talking about. So if you're hosting a concert or a band performance, a festival or a fair, possibly a parade or a procession. Oh, I think she's getting back to it. There you go. A large sports tournament that would potentially have, a big city benefit. A large run, like a running of the elk or a gobble wobble, things like that, a walk or a race, a lecture series, symposium, or conference that's open to the public, breakfast, lunch, dinner, reception fundraisers. There's going to be a little bit of a new process for that, and I'll talk about that in a little bit of a later slide. And then other events, like obviously we haven't covered everything here that you could potentially do. So there'll be an opportunity when you're applying in web grants to say what the other is. We talked about breakfast, luncheon, and dinner fundraisers. So every year we have folks that apply for these, and these are fantastic and wonderful events. The city is looking at a possibly different way to fund those, possibly outside of the event sponsorship grant funding process. So we can make sure and not have to do large, lengthy contracts if it's not a large event. Another reason for looking at this differently is these types of sponsorships are usually supported on a limited basis, and they generally serve a very targeted audience. They have a limited capacity, and they don't typically demonstrate broad citywide significance. And when we talk about that, we're talking about a large event that's open to the public, that isn't ticketed and only this many people can attend. Again, we are not looking to cut off funding for these. We're just looking to do these a little bit differently and make sure that the event sponsorship grant program is handling what it was originally designed for, and that's large scale events. But for now, we still want you to apply through the web grant process, and then we'll reach out to you with any changes. We do have a section where we talk about if you have a change in your event. Let's say you need to move the date, or the original date you wanted isn't going to work, or you have a time difference. So we're always going to work with any of our grantees on any changes that you might need. Other things that we haven't had to encounter in a long time could be health mandates, health restrictions, COVID, things like that. If also weather emergencies, let's say it's too smoky, you can't hold your event, or things like that. Just know that we will always work with you as long as we have a lot of advance notice. We can amend contracts if needed. If you make changes after the awards have been determined that are substantial, like all of a sudden you changed an event that where you were going to host for 5,000, now you only want to host for 50, that could result in a change in your funding or use of city facilities. But again, we're always here. We're always ready to talk to you, and we're here to help you with your events. So there's different sponsorship requests that you can ask for through web grants for the ESG program. Direct funding, so that's cash. Obviously, you want the city to be a sponsor of your event, so you can ask for cash. We also want to make sure that you are not relying on the city solely as your only cash sponsor, so we always recommend that you go out and find other sponsors as well. We talked about facility use a little bit earlier in the program. So the city of Elk Grove, we own the Old Town Plaza, which is an outdoor facility on Elk Grove Boulevard. And then we own District 56, which is on Civic Center Drive. So for Old Town Plaza, it's just the outdoor facility. There's only one way to ask for that. For District 56, we have different areas that you can ask for. We have the community center, which is an indoor facility. We have the avenue, which is right outside of the community center, and that's outdoor. Or you can ask for both. Let's say you want to have some things happening inside on the stage and some entertainment, and you want to have vendors outside on the avenue. You can ask for both. The aquatic center, we don't offer under the ESG program. That's typically for local swim teams and swim meets only. Again, when you're asking for in-kind services, police department service, that's like traffic management and overall event safety only. You cannot ask for police department to be your security. So we talk about event safety. So when there's a large event like a giant pumpkin festival or a Dickens fair, you'll see police wandering around in some yellow bright uniforms. They're there for event safety, and the number of police is determined by your attendance. You can ask for a road closure and traffic management. If you need Public Works to close a road for a run, a walk, a parade, or another special event you might be wanting to hold in the city, that's something you can request. You can also request waste management. We work with Republic Services. They're a great partner, and they will give in-kind services to our grantees. And so that is trash, recycle, and organic carts. And they will help determine how many you need based on the size of your event. The other thing you can ask for is marketing and promotion, and that's on the city's marketing channels. We have social media, we have a weekly email, we have various things. It's not guaranteed, but please, if you would like to have promotion from the city, we're always open to help you get word out about your events.
Thank you. Apologies for the slide. Every time I try to toggle myself on and off, my mouse does the video, the slides instead. So apologies for that. So now we're going to go into the application process and web grants itself and give you a little bit more background on utilizing the system that we take our applications in. So web grants is an online application system. All applicants must complete and submit online. So there's a link here. There's a link on our city's website at elkgrove.gov/grants. It's probably been on all the emails that you have received thus far, so hopefully you have that. But if you need access to it, please let us know. Applicants have to create an account to apply, and to be able to even see the whole application, you have to create an account. So all individuals who will need access to your organization's applications should request their own account. We highly discourage the use of shared accounts, and there's multiple reasons for that. One is there's an audit log in the system, so it shows who's doing what and who was the last one to make changes. It also helps, like, even if I know people share accounts a lot because different staff are working on different things or they're concerned about turnover. As long as we get you all linked to the same account in the grant, we can do that. You'll all have access that you need to. We also want to make sure that each registration has to be approved by city staff in order for it to be approved. So when you submit an application or a registration, I'm the one that goes in and reviews that and makes sure that the information is typed in correctly and that you're associated with a proper organization. The way the system works is that individuals register, and then the first person to register registers their organization, and then we link everyone else to the same organization. So there aren't multiple or duplicates, and it doesn't get as confusing in the system for us or for those of you who are working there. And it also helps, again, if there is staff turnover, for us to link new people to the organization and all the historical applications in there. If you are someone who's a grant writer, a board member for multiple organizations, or a volunteer, and you're going to be helping multiple organizations, which happens, set up your initial account with one organization and then contact me and I will help get you linked to all of the other organizations that you need to be linked to. Again, everyone who needs to access your application. So if your finance person is helping submit information, or if you have a volunteer and a board member who are working on pieces of the application, they all need their own individual accounts. There are 2 applications or funding opportunities in the web grant system. One is for the community service grant and community development block grant. It's a combined application. So you're going to answer the same questions for that entire, both of those programs. And then the other is the event sponsorship grant. So there's 2 funding opportunities, 2 different applications, 2 different deadlines. Eligible organizations can apply for CSG, CDBG, and or ESG, event sponsorship grants funding. There's no limit on the number of applications any one organization could submit. We ask that you don't just submit 100 so that we have to read through them, but you can submit as many as you have programs or activities that you're requesting funding for. However, each distinct activity or event requires a separate application. So if you're applying for a service activity and a facility improvement, those are 2 different applications. If you have 2 different events, 2 different applications, 2 different public service activities, 2 different applications. And again, if you're concerned or you don't understand exactly how your specific situation would apply, give Jody or myself a call and we can help you determine how many applications and what funding source you need to apply for. So when you go to the web grants page, this is what's going to pop up when you first see it. It has your user ID and password where you're going to set it if you're already registered, or if you've registered in the past and maybe you don't remember, use the reset password. If you don't remember what your user ID is, use the forgot user ID. I can also help look up your user ID. I can't look up your password, so you would have to reset that. But if you've been in the system and you're registering for a new account, and you already have an account, I'm going to decline it. And it's going to come back to you and say, user already has an account, and I'll give you information. Again, I can help walk you through that if you run into issues. But the login page on the right-hand side, you'll see under announcements, you'll see blue links for instructional step-by-step guides. Those are also found on our city website on the grants page at the very bottom. But it really walks you through how to register for a web grants account and how to apply for funding in web grants. Those are some little how-to documents that I've created a few years ago that have screenshots of each of the sections and walk you step-by-step through the process. So once you've registered, you'll get 2 emails. One will have your user ID and one will have your password. When you register, you're going to register your personal contact and organizational information. So on one side, you're registering who you are as a person, and then you're going to attach what organization. If you are the first person registering for an organization, you're going to try and enter as much information as possible that you have. So it's the information for the organization that's going to be tied to every other register and application that comes in. It talks about the address, the executive director, the website, the mission and vision, things like that. It talks about all of those. You can update them later and add later. So if you don't have all of that information when you go to register, that's fine. You have to do anything. You have to enter anything that's required though. So if it has a Red asterisk, those are the items that you have to enter in when you're registering. All the other information can be updated later. If your organization is already registered, if you know that, you only need to complete the required fields, because everything else is going to get erased because you're going to get connected to the organization that already exists in the system. So don't spend a lot of time updating or uploading attachments if your organization's already in the system, because those aren't going to be tied to kept in the system. If you need to update them, I can help you work on updating them after the fact. And a reminder that all applicants requesting CDBG funding have to should include their SAM.gov unique entity ID when they register. So once you're in the system, again, you want to make sure you have the right funding opportunity. There are two: the Community Development Block Grant, Community Service Grant, and the Event Sponsorship Grant. So your screen's going to kind of look like this, and then you're going to click anywhere along that line where it says ID, status, agency, program area, CSG, CDBG, or ESG. And then that will open up that funding opportunity. Funding opportunity means application, same thing. Some tips for the web grant system. Please fully read the funding opportunity details and descriptions. Jody and I put a lot of information in those funding opportunity details and descriptions about eligibility, about things that you need to know how before you apply and before you go to start answering the questions. So please read those. It includes more information than different information than what's being covered today. If you have additional applicants or users from your organization who are going to be helping you with the application, those can be added or linked to your application under the general information page. And I can help guide you through that if you need to. And again, some of those step-by-step instructional guides will help walk you through that as well. All application components, so the system calls the application areas components. I like to think of them as forms or like file folders, basically. All of them and required attachments must be completed before you're able to submit. The system simply won't let you submit if you have not submitted everything under the required fields. So make sure that you're checking what those are prior to 11:59 on the day that it's due. And prior to submitting your application, you can edit as often as you wish, as long you can come back and leave it. I think we have the system set up so it will not log you out after an hour. I don't remember how long it is. Maybe it's 24 hours. So just know that. But like we set it as long as we could, I think, so that you have the ability to come back and forth as much as you want without closing it out. But if you do get logged out, make sure that you're coming back to it and editing as much as you need to before the deadline. And you do actually have to submit before the deadline in order for it to get submitted. Once you're submitted, there's no more editing. And then, as we mentioned, you can submit more than one application for each of the funding opportunities. Some more tips. The application does not save automatically between questions. So when you're answering and putting in your answers, while you can walk away and leave your computer, and it probably won't reset or log you off for 24 hours, please make sure when you are, before you get up, that you are saving between your questions and doing that so that that data is being recorded. Almost always in the system, if it's blue text, it's a clickable link. There might be a couple options where there isn't, but most of the time it's a clickable link, whether it's either into the system and gives you some instructions or as an external source that will take you somewhere else to give you information on that. Required fields are shown in red text with a red asterisk. So make sure that those are completed as you're walking through, and there will be pop-ups that come and say, you haven't submitted something in this. If you try to save a form and nothing happens, you're likely missing text in a required field. So if you scroll all the way back up to the top, it'll tell you you're missing required fields. And then you kind of just scroll through the form or the page and look for anything that's red text identifying this field is required. And then you'll be able to see what you need to include before you can save and move forward. When you're entering text, I want you to be aware of the maximum character count for each text box. It's not there as a guide of, hey, you have to put this much text in there. It's more of a guide for you to know this is the space you have. And in some cases, we gave you more space than you probably need, but we wanted to be able to keep it open and give you the opportunity to do that. So you don't have to fill every single character. Just know that there is a character count so that it'll show you that. When you are cutting and pasting from a Word document or external resources, please know that it's going to cut off your text at that character limit, and it's not going to pop up and say you're over your limit. It's just going to cut it off. So it's really important for you to go back and review what you've entered in and make sure that all of the data you want and for the information you want in there is captured in there. And if you need to shorten it or make it a little bit different to make sure it's in there. But we have received applications that clearly they just cut and pasted and it got cut off and not all of the information got captured. Formatting with special characters does not copy over when cutting and pasting. So again, proofread and edit before you submit, because a lot of times you can tell that applications have been cut and pasted into the system because the formatting doesn't show up or it reads funny and it just hasn't been proofread and edited. To paste without formatting, to kind of clean it up before you put it in there, if you do Control-Shift-V instead of just Control-V, that's one way that will paste it in just as plain text. And then again, you need to go back and make sure that it's formatted properly. For our system, only plain text is allowed. So fancy formatting doesn't show up generally. So bold or italicized or underlined, they don't typically show up. If you are tech savvy and know your HTML codes, you can make it work. You can put it in there. So I know for me, when I'm entering in something that's plain text and it doesn't have fancy formatting, and I have a really hard time if I have several paragraphs and everything's running into each other and I don't like the way it looks and I want to make sure that there's paragraph breaks. I put in some tips here of how to make a paragraph break. If you want to be able to do that and try some fancy HTML in there. It's really just the break tag, which is in there. It's not required that you do this. We're used to reading the paragraphs that run into each other and know that, there should be breaks in there. But if it's something that you wanted to add in there, you can. Just also note that any of that HTML code does take your character count. So if you're within limits and you're trying to figure it out, go ahead and forego the break limits and just cut and paste in there. But I know I like to put them in there, so it's up to you. So attachments, both of the applications have their own requirement attachments in there. We highly encourage you to, before you even start answering any of the questions after putting in your grant application title, is checking out your attachments page early in the process. There are required attachments that you will need to pull together. You might need your accountant to pull together or other members of your staff or your organization. These are not things to leave to the very last minute on the last day when the application is due, because if you don't have the required attachments in your application, you won't be able to submit on time. So please check this early and make a list and contact those people that you need to contact to be able to get all of that and pull it together. There are certain ones that are required. So the ones that are marked red with an asterisk, make sure that those are the ones you cannot submit again without those. I ask you not to submit the same document to fulfill multiple requirements. So for the CSG and CDBG, there are several financial documents that are requested. And in past, we've had applicants who just put the same document under 3 required documents. They're not the same thing that we're requesting when we're asking for it. So make sure that you're not using the same attachment under all of those. There is an online help button at the top of the screen for the attachment section for the CSG and CDBG that describes and explains which each of those required financial documents are. I know sometimes it's even hard for me to determine, okay, what's a general ledger versus S&P or whatever it is. So we have the definitions in there so that you're able to find that out and read those and understand what we're asking for. If your organization doesn't have a specific required document, say it just doesn't pertain to your organization, please reach out to city staff and we will talk to you about how to submit your application without that. And there's many different file extensions that are supported. So if it's in a Word document, a PDF, PowerPoint, JPEG, whatever it's in, it should be supported by the system. We also have an option for other supporting documentation. So if there is something else that supports your grant request that we did not request, that you would like to include, you can include that as part of an attachment. One of the things that I've mentioned a few times, I think I'll probably mention several more before this is over, is in the attachment section, you are asked for your Secretary of State certificate of status. So you as an organization can print that off in a PDF form and attach it. You can also order the actual certificate of status from the Secretary of State. However, the online version is perfectly acceptable for this application. So the link is in the application that you can click on and do it directly there, and you're going to check it. I put these next two slides in here to kind of show you how to save that as a PDF and how to attach it. So when you do, you go to BizFile online and you're looking at your organization, you're going to look up the organization. Like here, I looked up the Police Officers Association. And in this case, only one organization came up. If your organization has similar names to other organizations, more organizations will show up. So you'll want to select yours. You'll click on the name of your organization. And then what's going to pop up is this kind of business search. It's a half screen. It's their website. I don't know why it looks like this, but it's going to pop up a half screen on the right-hand side where it has your initial filing date, your status, and all of that. And so in this case, all of theirs are good and they're in good standing. And so this one you would just print to PDF. So you Control P, your destination is a PDF. And then hopefully you should have a menu that pops up similar. It might not be exactly like this, but similar to this. And the main thing is I want to make sure is that you're collecting your headers and footers and your background graphics, that those are both turned on. So when you're printing the PDF, it'll show you, you'll see at the very top, it has the date that was pulled from the website, the date and timestamp, as well as the location. We check this as well on the city. We check this frequently. So if it's not perfect, we'll look it up ourselves, but it saves us some time in the grant review process that you are also checking it. And this is also a good opportunity for you to see if under your standing, it says report due or in progress or delinquent or something like that, that you have the opportunity to contact the Secretary of State and fix that status before you're submitting your application. So again, this is on the attachments page. So make sure you're checking that page at the very beginning of your application process so that you're not waiting until the very last minute to reach out to the Secretary of State and getting anything fixed that you need to. So once you submit the information, actually, I guess I'll back up. Staff is not monitoring application close at 11:59 p.m. Maybe in the first year we did this, I was awake at 11:59 p.m. Helping people with the website, but we are generally not. So please make sure that all your questions are directed to staff in time to answer during normal business hours prior to the deadline so that you are not stuck in the lurches at 8:30 at night on the application deadline when no one's here to help you. Again, as I said, the 11:59 is a hard deadline. It's a system deadline that we do not control. It's already set, so it will automatically turn you off. So no matter how far you are in applying or filling in all of your information, if you have not hit that submit button before that time, even if you're actively working on your application, it doesn't matter. You won't have the opportunity to submit your application. Once you've submitted your application, WebGrants will send an email confirming your submission to you at the email address that you're registered for. Applications cannot be edited once they're submitted. You can edit as much as you want up to that point, but after that, it's kind of locked for editing. And then again, the application closes at 11:59 p.m. So for technical assistance on web grants, if it's your first time using it, there are some step-by-step instructional guides. As I mentioned, those are on the login page to web grants when you first go to that site. They're also on our city website at elkgrove.gov/grants at the very bottom of the page. I can also email them to you if you need help on that. In the system itself, there is some online help with, it's got a little question mark and it's up kind of near the top. Some of those are populated with information, so that's always a good place to check if you're questioning something. I think I've noted in the application a couple times, especially on the financial documents for the attachments, I think clearly says in there, click on online help to help give you definitions. And then the city staff, we are also available to help. So for CDBG, CSG, you can reach out to myself, and then Jody's information is on there as well. One main thing to note in your application, so unless otherwise exempt under applicable law, applications and application materials, as well as any grant information once you are awarded funds, is public record. So all information received from an applicant or a grantee, whether received in connection with a grant application or in connection with any grant-funded activities performed, any emails you send are subject to disclosure pursuant to the California Public Record Act unless otherwise exempt. So please make sure when you're submitting anything financial or if you put up any of those documents that there are no bank account numbers on there. There are no, if you're putting supporting documentation for your beneficiaries, you're not putting any identifying information like social security numbers or things like that. Make sure that those are all redacted or not included in your application documents. Members of the public do have the right to request public records on any of the city's work. So typically, if someone would request information on our applicants, they would be given a read-only access to the applications. The city does some sort of redaction of items as needed or as required if we notice their social security numbers or bank account numbers, but it's not an exact science. So making sure that you're just not submitting that information to us in the first place helps the process. Okay, so now I'm going to talk a little bit more about the application for CDBG and CSG specific and give you a little bit of overview on those programs and kind of what that application looks at. The general information is pretty self-explanatory. It just sets the title for your application. I ask that you not use CDBG or CSG in the title. So don't say organization CSG application. It just makes it a little bit more confusing for me. If you do, it's fine. We can always edit it later. And you can change your title throughout the application period before you submit your application. But if you can make it more explanatory to the project that you're applying for, that helps. The funding talks about the funding categories and asks applicants to identify which type or types of funding they're applying for in that specific application. So whether it's community service grant, whether it's CDBG, whether it's community service grant, traditional funding, or capital improvement. For the project overview, organization information, CDBG eligibility and budget, we're going to go over in a little bit more detail in a second. So I'm going to skip over. Again, attachments, we already talked a lot about those. So making sure you're checking those earlier. And then your registrations and certifications. Again, that's where you're going to answer questions about your registration with the Secretary of State, the Registry of Charitable Trusts, and sam.gov if you're applying for CDBG funding. And then the certification is whoever's filling out the application and submitting it is certifying that the information submitted is true and correct to the best of their knowledge. So project overview. This page really talks about the project category and the type of activity you're applying for. So we're asking you to be as specific and clear about what you're requesting funding for. Project category would include whether you're applying for housing or public services, public facility improvements, purchasing equipment or supplies. It's a drop down, so you're going to select which one applies to what you're requesting. Your type of activity is talking about whether the activity is new to the organization, so it's brand new, your organization has never provided this to Elk Grove residents or never provided this activity. If it's ongoing, you've had this activity, but you're just continuing the activity, or if you're expanding it. So it's an ongoing activity, but it's something that you want to build and grow to add more people or include additional services. And then the project description, it's a short, brief 1 to 3 sentences elevator pitch basically on what you're requesting funding for. So this is when you have like 3 sentences to tell me what you're requesting funding for this specific activity. That's how brief we want you to be in this project description. Your scope of services is going to be a little bit more in-depth. It's kind of the who, what, when, where. Your more detail on each service or activity that's being provided for funding requested. So if you're requesting funding for general organizational support only, so you're requesting for rent or facility lease or mortgage, you're going to request or provide a description on kind of all services provided by your organization, how often each of those services provided, and who benefits from those. For facility or accessibility improvements or the purchase of equipment or supplies, you're going to provide an itemized work specification write-up. So giving some details about if it's a facility improvement, if it's remodeling the office space, you're going to give really strong details about what it is that you're applying for and your scope of work that you had contractors provide bids on. And then identify who's going to benefit from those proposed improvements. And then if you're, for the scope of services, if you are currently funded under a city grant, I highly encourage you to look at your current grant agreement and look at Exhibit A, your scope of services, and format your response to this question very similar to the format that is in that grant agreement. Because basically that's what I take the information from these grant applications for those that are awarded, and I have to build your contract out of that and your exhibit and your scope of services. And so sometimes there's a lot of work or there's back and forth between me and the grantees because it wasn't really clear in the application what they were applying for. So if you're currently funded, look at Exhibit A and see how that's outlined and how it's defined, and then kind of set up your answer in this question like that. Your location, we want you to identify the locations, all of the locations where the proposed activity or facility improvement will occur. If there's more than one location, we want you to identify which activities are going to take place at which locations. For equipment or supply requests, making sure that you are including the locations where the materials will be utilized. And then timeline, include your start and completion dates. Again, July 1st, 2026, June 30th, 2027 are the grant terms. So how often are these activities occurring? Are they occurring daily? Are they occurring weekly, monthly? How much time? Is it weekly for 2 hours on Tuesday? What are some significant dates or milestones? Are there cohorts that go through the group? What are some of those? Make sure that that's included in your timeline. And then cost to participate breaks it down if there is any cost to participants, and then if you offer scholarships or any of that information. Continuing with project overview, it talks about your beneficiaries, so who's going to be served through these programs or these activities that you are requesting funding for. Please only include people who receive the service, so not all who could use the service if desired. If it's a program that is open to all Elk Grove, I don't want in this beneficiary section for you to quote me the population of Elk Grove. We really want to know who logically is going to attend this service or participate in this, how many people are going to be served by this activity. And we're asking that you're counting beneficiaries once throughout the grant term. So even if they're receiving services daily or weekly, they should only be counted once during this grant term. And be realistic with this because these are tied to your goals and these will be tied to your grant agreement. So if you're saying you're going to serve 500 people, but in reality, you only have capacity to serve, 30 a month for like 4 quarters, that number might be lower. And so making sure that you're being realistic because you're being held to these goals. We do ask if your organization to identify if you're serving persons versus households and how you're counting that so that we have an idea of how you're counting and whether that's individuals or households. And then participant income level, we do ask you to identify the income level approximate. If you don't collect that data, how much will be low income versus non-low income. If your organization collects that data, this will be much clearer for you. If you don't, just kind of giving it an estimate. This is also helping us determine funding. So for those that are applying for CDBG funds, this helps us determine if you're eligible under that category. Again, you're going to report the participant income level by persons or households, however you've answered the previous questions. So making sure when you're going through the beneficiary sections that all of the numbers for each section are equal to each other. Because that's a common thing that I'll see is you'll report 50 residents served who are low income and 50 non-low income, so 100 total. But then when you go down to the total household served, you're going to say 120. And so those numbers need to be equal. And then we also ask, based on place of residence, your estimate of how many will be served that are Elk Grove residents versus residents of other areas. So the organization information, the overview talks about, it summarizes all services provided the organization. So this is your opportunity to give us a broader picture of what the organization does versus just what you're applying for under the project activity. We want to know a little bit more about the experience that demonstrates your capacity to manage the grant funding, whether you've been funded before or if you have others. So what experience does the organization have and the staff of that organization? The management, what positions are responsible for implementing the proposed activity. So whether that's support staff or program staff, even including your executive director and what levels those are going to be in managing this grant should you be awarded. Partner agencies, are any other agencies assisting with implementation of this specific activity that you're applying for? Do you receive referrals from anyone? Are you providing referrals to anyone through this services that you're providing? Is anyone partnering and providing additional services to the clients that are served within this program, et cetera? We want to make sure that you're covering that. Insurance, we'll talk a little bit about that later, but asking what level of insurance the organization currently has. Other grants. What other grants has the organization applied for in the past 2 years? Which ones are tied specific to the same activity that you're applying for funds for? And then also, this is important for us. Talking about other funding, our council has indicated in past years that grantees should be actively looking to reduce their reliance on city funding. So we really are asking to describe the organization's plan to strengthen long-term financial sustainability over the next 5 years. And if your proposed activity is currently being funded by the city, we're asking you to describe whether and how the organization plans to diversify funding sources to reduce reliance on city funding over time. These are competitive grants, and we have new people every year who are coming in and requesting funding. And so as a city, we're trying to honor kind of both long-term services that our city partners are offering, as well as be able to open up and bring in some new opportunities of funding. We do ask, this is a big one, partial funding. So typically grants come in and request the sky, and they request, hey, I want this much funding to be able to do this project. There is a question that says, typically we don't request 100% of the request. So what level can you still provide the services if you get a lower amount than what was requested, yes or no? And if yes, we ask that you give us some information on what that means. So if we fund 50% of your request, does that mean there will be a reduction in the numbers served or the hours of operation or whatever that looks like? Kind of give us a better picture. If you say no, that you cannot operate the activity at a reduced level of funding, what that means is then we know that if we're not able to fund it 100%, we are probably not funding it at any percentage. So make sure that you're reading that question, answering it appropriately for your organization and the specific activity. And then we also ask about the organizational assets, total assets, liquid assets, and restricted assets. Whew, okay, so CDBG eligibility is our next phase kind of component or form in the application. Again, this is for applicants who want to apply to be eligible for CDBG funding. Applicants have to answer the questions on this form. If you're only applying for community service grant funding, there are instructions in the application that say first enter your first question is no, and then select NA on the remaining questions on this form. You still have to enter it because it's required. So you have to go through and put no or NA as appropriate for each question before you can submit and move on to the next page. Again, there's online help at the top of this screen for the CDBG eligibility in the application that offers further information regarding CDBG funding. It is the organization's responsibility to make sure that you are, as an organization, can fulfill the requirements of federal funding. There are several links, there's several information there, but you need to make sure that you can uphold those requirements of the federal government. So if you have questions and want to talk through that, I'm happy to talk through that with you. But again, if this doesn't apply to you, you can easily skip through it by just saying no or not applicable. Okay, so next is the budget form. We're asking applicants to make sure when they're completing their budget to detail the full cost of providing the proposed project. Even though you're not requesting the full cost from the city in the grant, we want you to fill out the full cost so that we can see how much you are requesting versus how much is being funded by other sources. So in the budget summary, there's kind of some common categories of expenditures that are pre-filled for you. So facilities, personnel, programs, supplies, communications, those are pre-filled in for you. So if what you're requesting funding for fits in one of those pre-filled categories, you would just put the amount that you're requesting under that category. If they do not fit in any of those, there's an other category that can be used that doesn't fit in there. You just need to make sure that you're selecting other and then putting your own description in there so that we know what you're requesting funding for. You will put your requested amounts, the amount that you're asking in grant fundings, and then your matching funds would include all other funding sources used for the proposed project. There's also an in-kind contributions if your organization calculates the cash value of non-monetary contributions. So if you have volunteer time that you calculate the cash value of, you can include that in your application to show that as your in-kind contribution. Organizations that would like to request indirect costs, you can request up to 15% de minimis of indirect cost rate may be used by any non-federal entity that has never received a negotiated indirect cost rate. If you have a federally negotiated indirect cost rate, you can request that, but you do need to submit documentation under the attachments, under other attachments of that approved indirect cost rate. So this rate is charged against modified total direct costs, so or MTDC. If you are unsure what indirect costs are or what any of that means, a simple Google search, I think, can help give you some guidance on that. But then you can also call me and we can talk through whether you include that and what that means. Personnel expenses. In your budget, we would like you to show all relevant personnel that will be associated with your grant. So typically we see requests for program staff, but we also know that supervisors are part of that, and your executive director or your accountant. So we want to make sure you're including all personnel that would be tied to this grant. Even if you're not requesting funding for all of those positions, there's a way to show how much you're requesting from this specific grant request and how much is being provided as in-kind or other funding. And then under personnel expenses, you're going to click add a row for each staff person that is dedicating time to this project. Budget narrative, there is a section in there that we ask that you provide a description of what is anticipated and expenses are included and how the funds will be spent. Anyone requesting funds over 5,000 is strongly encouraged to include a more detailed budget and budget narrative in their attachments. If this format doesn't provide you enough space, you can attach that as supporting documentation. But if you're asking for program supply, $500 in program supplies, we're requesting a budget narrative that's going to detail out what that 500 is, and it's, you know, X number of widgets at X dollars each, and get those each lined out so that we know what that means or what you're requesting. Okay, so application review criteria. When we receive these applications, we have a team that will be reviewing all of them, and they're going to be looking at clarity of proposed activity. So what are you asking for? Do we understand what the activity is being provided and what the request is? The feasibility of it. Does it make sense? Does it sound like it can be accomplished within the time period that is there? Budget reasonableness. Is the budget reasonable to what they're requesting the activity for, or what is being served? The agency capacity. What experience does the agency have in doing things like this, or how long has the agency been around and what services they have provided? Impact on priority needs. So this city, for especially our community development block grant, we go through a 5-year planning process that we just went through last year. And in the application, there's links to the planning documents for you to review. But how are those proposed activities for CDBG? How do they fit with our consolidated plan? The benefit to Elk Grove residents. Are you proposing to serve 100% of Elk Grove residents, or is your activity proposing to serve 2% Elk Grove and then everything else is outside of our area? What is the benefit that our residents are receiving from these services? Are you looking to provide a new service to residents that hasn't been offered, or increase or expand services that are being offered to residents? Are you leveraging funds, and what is your self-supporting plan? So through the review process, almost every application is going to receive follow-up questions from the reviewers and the review team. They're going to be sent through web grants between February 23rd and 27th. And it's in a Word document, and you're requested to answer the questions and then upload that as an attachment. There is a short turnaround for these responses because we're getting all of these applications and reading them all and reviewing them, and then getting questions back to reviewers before we present and prepare our presentation to council and our executive team. So we ask that you respond as quickly as possible and get back to us. And if you have questions, you can always reach out. But we ask that you do respond so that we can fairly evaluate your application. And then we have a timeline up here of just kind of what's happening, the release applications, when they're due, our review period. We are presenting preliminary awards to City Council on March 25th, and you will receive, all applicants will receive that information the Friday, the council agenda, the Friday before the council date, so that you'll be able to review that. They are presented in a public hearing. So agenda, like I said, will all be agenda items, and the link to the staff report detailing that will be on our website, but also emailed out to everyone. And applicants can attend the meeting and or view on the city's website the archived version. And it is a public hearing, so you can provide public comment during that time. And then the application, the CDBG questions or applicants go through another action plan review period and are presented in May again. And then the final determination will be with the city budget in May or June. So that's a really quick overview of CSG and CDBG application. Jody's going to jump into event sponsorship, and then we'll get through to some Q&A.
Thanks, Alicia. Alicia gets a break. She needs a sip of water there. So for the event sponsorship grant applications, the components, or like we like to call them forms, or the sections of the application that you're filling out, there's some general information we ask for. We ask for an overview, what your sponsorship request is, any details about your event, The audience, like who are you serving? Is it families? Is it teens? Is it a cultural region? So anything you can fill out on your audience. We will ask for your budget for the event, and there are lines there, and it walks you through how to fill it out and what you're going to spend it on. Like, let's say you need to rent tents and tables and chairs and entertainment. So there's different lines for everything that you're going to be needing for your event. As Alicia has talked about, registrations and certifications, you have to have the Secretary of State, the one that she walked you through, and the Registry of Charitable Trusts. So those links will be on there for you to click on. And then attachments. I know Alicia talked about that, and I'll have a slide here that talks a little bit more about the attachments for ESG. So under overview, you're going to have a drop-down menu that where you choose the type of event. I know I listed some of them earlier, like a concert, a festival, a fair, a run, a walk. So you choose the one that you are doing. If not, there's an other. And if you do choose other, we may reach out to you just to find out what kind of event, but I think it will be obvious to us as you fill out your application with the title, the date, and what your event is going to be about. When we ask you for the event description, we want you to be really specific in that paragraph that you can put there, because that is then what we take and use as your scope of work on your contract should you be granted for your event. So please be really specific, like I'm hosting a run and it's going to be a 5-hour event. Tickets are, this much amount, et cetera, et cetera. I'm going to have vendors and live music and a kids activity area. Everyone's invited to come. So just, give me a real fun description of what your event will be and be as specific as possible. We also ask about citywide significance. Again, we're trying to make sure that this program fulfills the original goal of the City Council, which is to support large events with citywide significance. So on those things, you can talk about like what kind of impact will it have on the community? Who are the beneficiaries? What does that money go to? Is your event drawing in regional visitation? Like, are a lot of people coming from outside of Elk Grove to come to this event? That's something that we really like, right? We want to show off our beautiful city. Does it have a cultural significance that really appeals to a large portion of our population because we're a city welcome to all? So just in that overview section, please be detailed again on what is the citywide significance of your event. We obviously want the date and the location. Sometimes you might not know, or that's going to have to be fluid, and that's completely fine with us. So just, put in there what you think it's going to be. And as soon as it's confirmed, you can provide an update to us. With the hours, it's going to ask you the hours of your actual event, and then it's also going to ask your setup and tear down. So those are things that we need to do. We need to know, especially if you're asking for use of one of our facilities. So we make sure that we have the rentable hours for when you need it. Because let's say your event is 5 p.m. They might want to do another event in the morning, but if you need to be there at 8 a.m. for setup, we want to make sure that you have the facility for as long as you might need it. When we talk about the sponsorships, we talked before that you can ask for cash, facility use, and in-kind. So I just wanted to give you a couple notes and hints on those. So the Old Town Plaza is a completely open outdoor venue. It's beautiful if you haven't seen it. The grant only covers the cost of the rental facilities, and we also will provide a porter to you to service the trash and restrooms during the duration of your event. There are some other hard costs that you may be required to have depending on the size of your event. And those could be things like security, or if you needed staff, you have the option to pay for some staff to be out there. But it's all subject to availability. So when you are filling out your application and putting your date for your event, that might be the date that you want to have your event, but if it's not open, we would not be able to accommodate that. So keep that in mind to be flexible, and we will help you look for alternate dates. I will tell you that District 56, every single Saturday is already booked for the entire year of 2026. So a Thursday, a Friday, or a Sunday could be a better choice for your event. Also, I would reach out to District 56 now if you are steadfast in knowing that you absolutely want that facility. And I would book your date now with a refundable deposit so you can hold it. I wouldn't wait until the end of February and May and June when we review all of these grants. So please reach out to them if that's something that you're really wanting. And they can work with you now to tell you what dates are available. Some other things you can ask for, let's say you want the mayor to come out and speak at your event, or you want some swag. Like I'll give you an example. Right now, Running of the Elk is happening in March. They already reached out and said, hey, can we have some of your event calendars? I need about 1,300. Absolutely, because they're going to put them in the runner's bags. So you can ask for different things at your event that might not be on there. There is a section for other. So go ahead and put it in there and we'll let you know if that's something that we can help accommodate. Again, we talked about police not being able to be used at your event as security. Grantees are responsible for coordinating their own event security. You would need security. Let's say you want the plaza overnight. You want to set up on Saturday, but your event's not until Sunday. So you would be responsible for paying for security. Police cannot be used for that. Police can also not be used for alcohol event checking IDs, running security for a beer garden. They'll be there because you're having alcohol and they want to make sure your event is safe, but that's different than being actual security guards. And also, a lot of people will put under the other, they'll ask for like tables and tents and chairs. Unfortunately, believe it or not, Josh and I have a very limited supplies, and our tents are branded for city, so we don't loan those out to others. And honestly, we have like 12 tables and 20 chairs. So we're also borrowing from other entities when we need them. So we do not have any equipment available for grants or for rent. Some of the details that we ask you to fill out in that section. So if you are doing a parade or a run, you are going to have a road closure. So if you're asking the city to do that and asking for public works assistant, there's going to be some other requirements that you'll need to add to your grant. We're going to ask you for a map so we can see what roads you want to close. And then after, if you are approved, you're going to need to fill out a street use permit and pay for that fee. Usually for nonprofits, it's very minimal to do that. We just need to make sure that we have the paperwork that goes through our public works department, and that alerts them to the fact that, oh, there's going to be a road closure. And that kind of triggers a meeting for all of us. You're also going to have to work with CSD. The Parks and Rec Department and CSD Fire are separate from the city. A lot of cities, Parks and Rec and Fire falls underneath them. Here, CSD was established way before the city was incorporated. So you'll have to work with CSD Fire if you are closing a road. And then, like I said, when you fill out that street use permit, that triggers that, oh, we need a meeting. And so Public Works will set a meeting with police, Public Works. Usually they invite fire, and myself and Josh are usually on those calls, and we just go over everything. Oh, here's your map. Let's talk about all the road closures. And then police will work with Public Works. They'll come up with like, how many cones do you need? How many message boards would you need to close all of these roads? So just be really specific when you're filling anything out that you think could affect multiple departments for the city of Elk Grove. Insurance. We require insurance for every event, whether it's for 20 people or 20,000 people. So there will be insurance requirements that we ask you to submit if you are approved for the grant. We do have some questions in web grants that are new that ask you, do you have employees? Do you plan on driving on grounds? So if you drive on grounds, that means we need your auto insurance. If you have employees, that means we need workers' compensation. So there's some questions in there. And if you come across those and you're not quite sure, you can say no, or you can reach out to us, pause your application, and we can help you answer those questions. If you have a lot of food vendors, depending on the number you have, you may be required to file for a health permit with the Sacramento County Health Department. We do that for all of our events. So anything over 3 food trucks requires a permit. So you would be required to do that on your own and pay for that on your own. And if you do anything with a tented vendor, you're going to need a food permit. But 3 food trucks or less, no permit. So there's another little hint for you. If you're serving alcohol, you're going to need an ABC permit as well as alcohol liability on your insurance. And depending on how many people, potential PD presence. So like an event like Elk Grove Brewfest, that's not a nonprofit, so it doesn't fall under this, but it's something that we partner on. They're required to have a lot of police there because the amount of attendees they have, and it's a solely alcohol event. So just some things to think about when doing food and drink. And one last note on that, if you have an event at Old Town Plaza that has alcohol, depending on the attendance as well, or if you close a road there, we require that you have security at the railroad tracks, because that is an active railroad that does not shut down during events. And if people are drinking, it could become dangerous if somebody's not there monitoring and make sure people are paying attention to the railroad crossing. Some other things that you'll see on the application, should you say you're going to host a run or a parade, while the police department does work diligently to close all the roads and have police at all the major intersections, they will also require you to have volunteers to work alongside them at a lot of the smaller intersections, all the road closures. And this is to help them, like when neighbors come, right? And they say, I need to get through. And so there's volunteers there saying, I'm sorry you can't, but here's the alternate direction you could go. We ask for those names of your volunteers once you are in contract mode for us, and then PD will reach out to them and schedule a meeting so everyone's on the same page and they know what their job duties are for any of these events. If you do not provide enough event volunteers, or the number that police asks you for, you could be charged out of pocket for additional officers outside of the original plan. When we go over your applications, PD has to give me a budget number, and that's how I come up with that number that I submit to council when we submit all of these. And should we find that, PD asked you for 10 volunteers and you only provided 2 and they had to call in 8 off-duty officers, you could potentially be charged for that. For all events, we ask that people remember that following your event, when you're packing up and leaving, to do one last walk and make sure that you are returning the facility as you received it. We do that for our own events as well. It's an easy thing to forget, but it's really important because our facilities typically have events every single day. So we want to make sure that the facility looks clean and looks really nice for whoever's going to be renting it next. For the larger events like the parades, we do work with Public Works, and we ask that a street sweeper come the next morning as part of your grant, and that's something that is paid for through the event sponsorship grant. We talked about registration certifications. There is a food recycling law, SB 1383, and that all revolves around food recycling. So we just want to make sure that when you're filling out your application, this section will be in there. We're going to ask you to say, I understand. That you will do your best and due diligence with the separation of recycling, organics, and garbage at your events. And typically what Public Services likes you to do is have all 3 carts together. So you have a garbage, a recycling, and an organics cart in pods of 3 all over your event. And they'll help you with that. They'll help determine how many you need, but there will be a section on the application where we ask you to say, I understand. Eventually, this could be mandated and enforced, but for now, we want you to do the very best that you can to make sure that you offer those in pods of 3 so your guests hopefully make the right decision in where they're putting their waste. Our timeline is different than Alicia's. Like she said, we extended a little bit later because we want to give those of you that may have applied for her grant but should have been applying for mine a little bit more time to get in there and fill out ours. You can see the whole list here of all of our timeline. And just like Alicia said, we go to City Council on April 22nd. You will be notified of that. You do have the opportunity to attend. A lot of people ask, is it mandatory that I be there? It is not. Is it mandatory that you speak during public speech? It's not. A lot of people will get up and just thank the council for their continued years of support of their event and let them know how important it is that they receive the funding from the city. And it's always a real feel-good moment. So you are more than welcome to attend. However, it is not mandatory. And once we approve everything, the funding year, as Alicia had mentioned, begins July 1st. And those are for events July 1 through June 30th. And apply away. We're excited. We like to see events, and we like to see well-oiled event producers come to our city and bring something new, something that Josh and I aren't already doing. So we really appreciate you guys. And like she said, you can always reach out to us with any questions you have.
So now we're just going to talk about just some key grant policies that may affect your decision to apply or not. This is just brief information, so it's not everything that would be included in your grant agreement. But awarded applicants will receive 1 or more grant agreements based on their funding source. So for my programs, if you're applying for CSG and CDBG, you're going to get 2 different agreements for each funding source because they have their different requirements for each of them. But agreements overall are sent electronically through DocuSign. We ask that you read your agreement carefully before signing for all of our agreements, even events, and make sure that the information included in them, especially in your scope and your budget, is accurate and true to your activity or your event. Most edits require a formal amendment once the agreement has been executed and signed by all parties. So if you need edits, when you're getting it in DocuSign, if you see it, don't sign it. Contact us and we'll work through the edits before you sign it. Because it used to be that, agreements were handed in paper with a signature, and then it would take like a week or so to get through all the different levels of approvals here at the city. But honestly, now with DocuSign and the way it goes, an agreement can be executed and fully signed in minutes from after the grantee signs it. And like I may not even have gotten all the emails saying that all the parties have reviewed it. And so I don't always have the opportunity to stop it before it's fully executed because it goes through pretty quick. All of our clerk, our city manager, all of our attorneys, all of them are pretty adept at getting through those rather quickly. So just basically read through it and make sure you're contacting us before you sign it. Insurance coverage is required, as Jody mentioned. The types and amounts will vary based on the activity or the event. So we will go through that with you and give you the information. The city works with a third party to manage our insurance. So if awarded, we're going to guide you through that submission process. And we will not sign the agreement until the insurance requirements are met. File retention. The dates start after the grant closeout. So if your grant closes out June 30th of 2027, that's when the clock starts. CSG and CDBG, all grant-related files must be maintained for 5 years and events for 2 years. Again, the organizational standing. This is a big one, and I'll tell you why. It's important for us to make sure that we are working with organizations that have strong standing and that are following the law and following the requirements of the Attorney General and the Secretary of State. It's also important to the public. This is one of those areas that we get public records requests on maybe once a year at least, where someone is saying, hey, we don't think this organization is in good standing, because these standings change throughout the year depending on when your reporting periods are. So every organization has a different reporting period based on when they incorporated or when they registered to begin with. So we check these frequently as the city. We check them at the application time. We check them before we route the agreement for review through our city attorney's office. We check them as you're signing the agreement. So if there's a window where it's kind of right in between that time frame when we're signing, we check it frequently throughout that period. We will check it before we cut a check for any reimbursements. So making sure that you as an organization know your status and know if you have a report due or know if you have some documents, and then you as an organization are working with the California Secretary of State or the Attorney General's Registry of Charitable Trust to make sure that your status is active. We have no control. We only see what's on the website that each of them have, but making sure that you are aware of that. And the links, again, they're in here, they're in the application. We've listed them as many times as we can. So if you need more information, I encourage you to check those links out and find out more information.
I think that's a good time for a hint, right? So we've seen that if you are delinquent, and the most we see of this is with the Attorney General, that you can take care of it in one day if you go in person. If you try and do it online, it does take a little bit longer, but if you go directly down and take care of it in person, typically they turn it around pretty quickly.
And sometimes their websites are delayed in getting updated. So if you have documentation that you received in person from them or via email that you can attach or send to us, we will accept that because we do know that their websites can be delayed. But they're also tied to your taxes as well. So there's lots of different things that this is tied to. So making sure that those are up to date. For those that are requesting CDBG funds or receive CDBG funds, you have to have the SAM unique identity ID in order to even apply. and then you have to maintain an active registration throughout the term. So all of these are throughout the entire term of your grant agreement. So making sure that those are up to date. And if the organization somehow becomes debarred, then we're unable to work with federal funding for that. Communications and city logos. So all grantees must include the city's name and or logo in materials identifying sponsors, donors, or contributors to the activity, event, or organization. You have to obtain the city's approval before using that logo or name in any communication. And that's basically to make sure that you're using the right logos, that the city's public relations team wants it branded properly. You're not using outdated logos, and the ones that fit the best look for what you're doing. If it's fitting the same size as other logos that you're putting in for your sponsors. So if you submit those materials via email to myself or to Jody, depending on your grant program, for prior approval, we'll be able to run it through our PR department. They look at it. Honestly, they get back within hours most of the time, or the same day. It's not a lengthy approval process. And they'll say, looks great. Have them use this specific logo. We want to make sure you're not putting the logo in a box or shading it or changing or things like that. So the review process is super simple and fast. Just shoot us an email and say, hey, here's a draft of the flyer that we want to use and we want the city logo. Which one do we do?
I will also say, Alicia, we did recently tweak the logos slightly. It's really hard to see. So if you're a grantee that's been with us before, please make sure that you note that we did tweak the logo slightly. Another thing I will say is we love getting those flyers, and we love, like, if you do a social media thing, I want to make sure you understand there's also some laws coming up with accessibility, and posting things that have a lot of verbiage on them is not something that works well on our website or on social. So if you'd like to create a poster and a flyer that you're doing for print, and that's great, you can have a bunch of stuff on it. If it's something that you're hoping we post or we share, less is more. So the name of your event, the date, the location, and the time. And then you can give us all of the other details in an email when you attach that graphic. Like, oh, we're going to have 75 vendors, 4 stages of entertainment, a special surprise. We can include that when we type out on any of our electronic communications, but the graphics need to be as clean as possible in order to meet the ADA requirements that the most government agencies were put upon us this year. So we've been going through a lot of compliance for all of our social, digital, and websites right now. So just keep that in mind if you create something you'd like us to share.
In the cases where the grantee funding is related to the arts, the grantee must also display the logo for the Elk Grove Arts and Creative Economy Commission in all relevant communication. So again, that's something that you would just send to us, and we know if it's related to the arts, but that information is in your grant agreements. So just knowing that there needs to be space for that as well. And then anyone who is receiving CDBG funding, the subrecipient shall also ensure recognition of the role of HUD's Community Development Block Grant program in funding for those services. Required reporting. All reports are submitted in web grants. And again, you'll get way more information if you're awarded funding. But just know CSG and CDBG, there are either quarterly and or mid-year and year-end reports showing your persons served. CDBG recipients also must collect information on demographic characteristics and income of those served and report on that. Annual reporting describes persons served and accomplishments. And then financial reporting talks about the types. It depends on the type of grant, but there are financial reporting requirements. For the event sponsorship, Jody, you want to talk about your report?
Yeah, we just have one that we asked for. Sorry, a little bit simpler than Alicia's because she has some federal reporting that she has to do. We asked for a post-event summary report, and it includes some financial summary. And basically what we're looking for too is the attendance numbers. How many people came? How many approximately? We know that unless you're doing a ticketed event, it's really hard, but your guesstimate is just fine with us. We do a quarterly report to our city council. It doesn't list each one. It adds everything up together. And so it shows an overall impact in the city when you bring your events here. And so as long as you can give us, approximately how many people you think attended, a little bit of your financial summary, and then you have an option in there leave notes and or comments or things you might want to change for next year or what you thought was the best part of your event. So please fill those out. We use those in the next year if you apply again to look through those and say, okay, here's the impact they had. Here's how great it was. Here's what they'd like to change. So it's a really good report for us to have from you.
Our payment policies, all payment requests are submitted in web grants. They're actually called claims in the system. But for CDBG and CSG, we are reimbursement only grants, which means your organization has to have the financial stability to be able to pay those costs upfront and then get reimbursed on a quarterly basis. Your organization also has to include adequate backup documentation for those requests. So again, payroll, timesheets, invoices marked as paid, things like that. And again, if you're awarded funding, I can go through this with you and talk much more in detail on that. The event sponsorship grants, those payments may be requested in advance, but no more than 30 days prior to the event date. All required documentation, whether it's reports, event summary forms, permits, those must be submitted and approved prior to payment requests being paid. Again, not to harp on it, the organizational standing for Secretary of State, Registry of Charitable Trusts, and SAM, if required, must be active and current in order for the city to disperse funds. And then failure to comply with terms and conditions of the agreement, whether it's failure not limited to, but including complying with registration status or report submission or meeting goals, may result in the city reducing or terminating funding. Technical assistance and monitoring. So our staff is available to help grantees throughout the year. Jody, myself, Josh, we are here all year long to help and walk through any questions that you may have. I know I have provided on-site assistance for reporting and invoicing many times to many grantees. We can review and discuss modifications to your scope under your budget. If things change at any point in what you're providing services, please work with us and talk to us, because it's way better for us to know in advance so that we can modify your agreement. Then at the end of the year, you don't have outcomes to match your scope or your budget requests. And then we come into some issues. We also are here to help navigate web grants and walk you through the different screens and where you might get stuck. I have some how-to documents, as well as just picking up the phone and calling me. I can help walk you through some of that. All grants are subject to financial and program audits to ensure accountability, proper use of funds, and compliance with grant requirements. For CSG and CDBG, we review your financial records, program documentation, and overall performance to ensure that grant funds are being used appropriately and that program goals are being met. And CDBG specifically, we also adhere to adherence to applicable federal regulations, including but not limited to 2 CFR Part 200, which I talked about at the beginning of this webinar. There's a link in here, and all has specific requirements covering financial management, program outcomes, and reporting standards. And there are some evolving and changing requirements at the federal level, so making sure that your organization is up to date on those should you be awarded funding in that. Whew, so that was a lot of information. We do have the opportunity to open up for questions and answers now. You can do it 2 ways. There's a Q&A section at the top, which will you're welcome to enter in. You can also raise your hand, and then I can unmute you, and you can come on and ask your question. Copies of this presentation, slides, the slide deck, and a recording of the webinar will be on the city's website within the next couple days. Sometimes it takes a while to download, and then they have to transcribe and do all closed captioning for ADA. So we need to do all of that. But within a couple of days, it should be up on our website. And then you can access and go back and look at different parts that you need to. And then Jody and I are also available for questions after this as well, if you have them. And then I'm going to put a link in the chat for the service provider community needs survey. And that really just helps the CDBG program and the CSG program determine overall what the needs are in our community. So you'll get an email with that link after the fact. I'll send a separate email to everyone who's registered for this if you have time to please take that survey and give us some feedback on that. But with that, I'm going to look and see kind of if we have some Q&A or anyone who's raising their hands.
I can answer the event ones. Had a couple of questions. One person asked what quantity of attendees is considered a large event. I would say for us, a large event would be 1,000 or more for an outdoor public event. For an indoor event, if you're doing something inside and outside, sometimes you're limited by how many people can sit inside. So we take a lot of things into consideration when we're reviewing these. So let's say you only had a 500-person event inside, but it also had a large citywide significance to a certain population because it was a cultural performance. So different things, it all really depends. That's why it's really important for you to fill out those event details when you're doing that. Like District 56 only holds 500 people inside, but outside, I mean, we had almost 10,000 at our Illumination Festival. So make sure you fill out those details and we will take all that into consideration when we're looking at it. You also asked about citywide, another question about citywide significance again. It could be on attendance, or it could be cultural significance, or it could be, let's say you're having a small event. Let's say your event's only 500 people, but you're raising $200,000 in something that gives back to the community. That could be considered citywide significance. So while we don't have a list of criteria because every event is different, we really do spend a lot of time. We sit in a room, I think it's over 4 hours with a bunch of departments reading through every application. We have to score them before we even sit in that meeting and meet. So we really will take into consideration what kind of event you're offering. Does it draw visitation? Does it represent a city for all? Does it raise funds for, thousands of kids to go to a camp? There's just all kinds of things we will look at. If you have any questions specifically, please email me and I'll answer those as best as I can. But we're really looking for you to bring your event here and we'll do everything we can to see if we can support it. We are limited in cash and in kind, and we typically get more applications than we can fund. So sometimes we give smaller amounts to folks just to try and give everyone something, because if you have a great event, we want you here. I think there was two in there for you.
Yeah, I'll get to this. I'm going to allow, I think Teresa Gutierrez has her hand up, so I'm going to unmute. So go ahead and ask your question.
Hello.
Hi.
I had a question about the CSG grant.
Okay.
Being that you can only apply for it every 3 years is what I'm understanding. Would that mean that when we apply for it, for a program, that we can apply for 3 years of programming?
So for the community service grant, there's 2 streams of funding. One is kind of what we call traditional, and that's something that you can apply for on an annual basis. And you would just reapply every single year. Our grants are 1-year terms, so July 1st through June 30th. And under CSG traditional, which is where like your typical program activities are going to fall under, or services, you're going to apply annually for that. We also have kind of this, like last year, I think we call it one-time funding, but it's a different bucket of CSG funds that is really set aside, council set aside, and it's for those programs that typically don't get funded because it's so competitive, but that are looking for capital improvements or are looking for program supplies, like to be able to buy. I think this year we funded band instruments or forklifts for an organization. So those are the things that if you are awarded funding under that capital improvements category, you can only apply every 3 years under that category. But your ongoing program activities, you can apply under the traditional every single year. And to complicate it more, you can actually apply under the traditional for capital improvements every year. It's just saying that there's this extra bucket of funds that is really meant for those organizations that have a harder time competing with kind of some of our larger annual programs that get funded, giving them the opportunity to apply under that one-time funds. Does that make sense?
Yes, thank you so much.
You're welcome. Okay, let's see. Does anyone
Yeah, I think the
else?
other questions in there are for you.
Okay. I was looking to see if anyone else had their hands raised. Let's see. So asking if you can still apply for traditional the following year. Yes, you can apply for the CSG traditional on an annual basis. If you, I guess I'll give an example. If you apply for the CSG one-time funding or the capital improvement funding to purchase, we'll say forklifts, then the following year you can't apply for forklifts under traditional program or the other program because you've already done that program. But if you're applying for forklifts under the capital improvements and a program or an activity service under the other, you can continue to apply under that traditional program every year for the same program. A question on if costs can be estimated or if you have to have actual bids attached. Costs can be estimated. We ask that you do your best to make sure that they are as close as possible in terms of, you do research and kind of look online and figure out what the costs might be. But when we get closer to awarding grants and working through the agreements, we need actual bids attached. So if you've gone out and I can't do a scope of work or a grant agreement without an actual bid to know that you are spending X amount of dollars on this. And again, it's still an estimate, right? But at least it's more specific to the project that you're looking at versus like an online search. But it's giving us a better idea of what the scope of work is and how much it's going to cost. And that really helps in us determining as well how much we're able to fund and if you're still able to do the capital improvement with a lower level of funding. So you can do estimates, but we ask that they be as accurate as you can get them at the time of applying. We know you're not going to have specific bids in hand if you don't know if you're funded to do the project. So the best you can estimate that. Let's see. So if you're using the CSG grant for funding gap on an existing program, does that meet the increasing capacity requirement? If it's an existing program that you already have going on, that I'm trying to clarify. Hold on. So I guess the question for CSG is if it's an existing program that is getting city funding already, and you're asking for additional funding to serve the same population and the same thing, then we really want to know why you're asking for additional funding. If you lost other funding and are trying to replace that, or what has changed in the organization. If it's an existing program that the city has not funded before, and was funded elsewhere, and now you're asking for city funding to cover a portion of that funding that has previously been funded somewhere else, making sure you're explaining why city funding is now needed when you've in the past used other funding to support this activity. If it's an existing program that you're growing and you're adding additional participants or adding additional services, and so your budget for that existing program is growing, and that is what you're asking for the city funding is to kind of cover that growth, then you're going to explain that in your application. So it kind of depends on your situation and what type of activity it is and what the previous funding has been on it. And again, if I'm not answering that clear enough, you can reach out and we can kind of talk about your specific situation. If this doesn't like help and you want to like say, okay, well, here's my specific situation, and then we can talk about that a little bit more. But it really kind of depends on how that is. See, the next is talking about mentioning the nonprofit has to be in existence for one fiscal year. So to be eligible for CDBG or CSG funding, we ask that the organization has completed one full fiscal year. So if the organization opened January 2025, then yes, they would have completed their full fiscal year by the time this application is due, so they can be able to apply. And mainly you'll see when you get to the attachments, we're looking at your agency budget and your S&P and your general ledger and those type of things. And if you haven't been in existence for a full year, some of those items you may not have to be able to show us your organization history. Let's see. Does the city provide any signs or banners for projects funded by the CSG grant since they are required? We do not provide any specific signs or banners. What we ask is if you are, and this is the language that's in the grant agreement, that if you are identifying sponsors of any of your events, or well, not of your events because events aren't mine, but if you're identifying sponsors of any of your activities or programs, then you are required to identify the city as one of those sponsors. So really it's if you're doing any printed publications or printed information or on your website, those type of things, that you would include the city's logo on those. We are not asking you to specifically go out and print a banner just to say the city is sponsoring your activity or your program. But if you are identifying sponsors of any kind, then we need to be included in that. So again, we can work through this individually on a grant level if you have questions or unclear in terms of how it would apply specific to your situation. But it's not anything in addition or that we are providing to you. It's more of what you are, that you're including the city in those. All right. Let's see, are there any other participants that have their hands raised? I don't see any. Okay, and Jody, we got through all the questions.
Got through them all. You guys asked really good questions.
Oh, maybe more.
We just
One
had
more.
one hand raise.
Oh, and then
And
it went
Manuel.
away.
Thanks, Manuel. We love this. We love that we're able to give back. I mean, we're very fortunate to have these opportunities to give back to nonprofits in our community. It's pretty special program that we have here. So we're happy to do it.
I think there is a question over in the chat that I just saw that asks, has the city awarded event sponsorship grants to an organization for 2 different events in one grant period?
Yes, most definitely. Yeah. Each event will need a separate application, but we have done multiple events under one contract. For example, we have a group in town that has done a dinner and a parade. So they've gotten some. We've had another group that's done 2 cultural events, and so they were awarded both. So apply for as many events as you are looking for funding for, and depending on the nature of those applications, 1 or more could all get approved.
Great. Okay, we have a
Yeah.
question from Rachel.
Yes, hello, ladies. I missed where the grants for the ESG for the events. I missed, like, how much is it available that each nonprofit can receive funds for an event?
It's all dependent on how many apply. So we have a pot of money, and it all depends on how much you request. I will tell you that, the largest cash amount we've given out, I believe, is around 10 to 12,000. We tend to give more in the in-kind services because a lot of people want to use District 56, or they need PD at their event, or they need a road closed. So the bulk of our funding goes towards the in-kind services. For direct cash amounts, They can range anywhere from 1,000 up to 10,000. And again, it just depends on your event. We look at your budget, what are you looking to try and cover? How can we help? And how can we give out the most to everyone and not trying and not give to someone? So it differs year to year.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
I think with that, we are going to wrap up. Again, we want to thank you for your attendance and for participating today. If your questions did not get answered, please reach out and we are happy to answer those. We will post this slide deck as well as the webinar on our website for you to follow up and review as many times as you choose. And I will also send a follow-up email to everyone with our community needs survey. So if you have questions, please reach out, and we thank you for your attendance and your time today, and we look forward to reading your applications.
Thanks, everyone.